Okay, so we are on week 8, day 1. Hey, 2 months down at the end of this, or is it 2 months down already? I don't know how we do this, but we're in week 8, the second half of our little web module, learning about, everything front end, client side for the user and how they interact and how we handle that information in the front to pass back to some sort of back end somewhere that we're not worrying about right now. Um, so on Saturday, we got an intro into fetching from third-party APIs. And without looking back at our README, does anybody remember what a third-party API is? Like what its purpose is? What kind of what does it do?
It's the database.
It's okay, so yeah, it's like a database. It's not going to be the database itself, but what does it do with that data in the database?
It basically
You could,
bridges those two companies' um, databases, or one to use the other's database, basically.
Yep, exactly. So it's going to be like something in a back-end system that's taking that information out of one organization, companies, whatever database, and giving that information in a way that another person, company, organization can come in and grab that data and use for their own. That way, and you can save in your own database, uh, in your own organization, or you can just grab the data to use in a web application and just kind of, then you don't have to maintain it yourself. You'll just borrow from somebody else's database and use their data. So APIs are like getting to be the backbone of data exchange right now. Of course, there's other ways to exchange data like FTP, um, which is file transfer protocol. I think it's protocol. I'd have to look it up. SFTP is the same thing. It's like secure file transfers where you're actually like transferring actual files. But we found that APIs are just a lot more, I want to say they're user friendly in a way that you can serve up a lot of information with various different endpoints, give those endpoints out to people to hit and get data based on what they're looking for. Whereas maybe a file exchange, you have to support a whole bunch of different files with different excerpts of data. An API can really be smart and just query what it needs from the database and pass it off to the outside world. Anyways, I love APIs. We're going to go more into depth in that today, in hooking it up a little bit more with a web application, because I think on Saturday, let's look back. I think on Saturday we just looked at, okay, cool, we did Postman, and then we looked at fetch and returning that information, and then just stuck it on our page. So today we're going to be doing something very similar, but we're going to be using some of the dynamic features with JavaScript as well to kind of change what information we're putting on our screen. Um, First, we're going to take a little brief introduction into curl. So curl, as we can see here in the README, is a command line utility that runs on a Unix-based system. It can basically get the HTML from a specific website. You can also use curl to get if you're hitting an API endpoint, you can use curl to target that endpoint and get that JSON data in the web browser or wherever you output it as well. So we can make a GET request, and we learned in Postman a GET is we're going to send a request to get that data back from whatever URL we are visiting. So when these are run in, curl commands are run in your terminal. So you'll pull up a terminal, and I can run, as they said, curl www.example.com. So let's see what that does. What does it mean? It gets the HTML for me. Example.com. So we can see curl brought back the whole basically HTML document. It looks like we can see the doc type of what we're used to seeing it start with. We have the head with all the metadata information, our style is up here. Let's see, it's kind of hard to read though, right? Because it's in the terminal, but it looks like the entire HTML representation of that web page. So we can go further and take a look at it in a easier to view way. I guess you can, let's see. So this command did not work for me. It might work. I'm on WSL though, so it might work on if you're working on a Mac right now. But this command is saying run this curl command to that URL and then output it as an HTML file. And then open that HTML file. So what did we do at the beginning of class to make it so we can open files in our VS Code to look at easier? What alias command did we give that? Code. Yep. So it is code. So I'm going to take this command that we have here, and instead of just saying open, which may or may not work on your system depending on what you have installed, we know we can say code to open up a file that we want in our VS Code. So we will, I don't even need to type that. I can push my up arrow to say curl, and we're going to pipe it into a my example site.html. And we're going to say, and after you pipe that over there, code my example site.html. Okay, so now we see that was the curl command request here. This shows you like percent received, percent total, transferred, whatever. This is there. But it will basically tell you about the packets we requested over our internet connection. So we received it all, and then it made that file behind the scenes, and then code opened it up in our VS Code. Of course, it's still not looking right, but thankfully we have this handy format document you can do, which will put it into the HTML style we're used to seeing. And if we want to see what this looks like, we can also just let's show preview, because I don't care. Don't show that again. This is fine. Okay, so this is what that HTML from that site does, what it looks like in my browser. Cool. So this can be handy. You can use this. You notice it pulls everything in, like the paragraphs and the titles and, you know, the values of things. So maybe you can get creative with how you use the HTML returned from a curl command. Honestly, I use curl more to query API data. Let's see, what's free APIs? Let's just look for a free, easy API to hit up. Oh, these are not going to be easy to look at. Okay, let's go back to our search. Maybe, was that? I just want, okay, Fortnite, maybe it has an easy endpoint for Fortnite. Okay, so we can get playlists. Let's do that. We're going to copy this. So it's a URL, just like we'd expect. But being a third-party API, this should return to us JSON data instead of HTML. So let's curl that. Okay, so we can see it gave us a whole bunch of the API data, and it is structured in JSON where it's key value pairs all throughout this. So you can use curl to get information from your APIs as well as the whole HTML page. This is useful for when you're doing automation, maybe that uses like terminal commands, because you'll use whatever, I guess, whatever, what do I want to say? Function that is built into whatever language you're working in. So in JavaScript, we use fetch. We'll be using different libraries and whatnot in Python to get our data from different sites. So curl you can use when using like PowerShell. I know I work in PowerShell though. Bash, other just console like pipelines to get that information. These are a little more detailed informations you can get from your curls requests as well. So look at these in your own time if you want to dive more in depth on curl. But this is the extent of what we'll do with curl in this cohort. It's useful to know because of, like I said, using it in maybe some pipelines that you don't have a specific language you're working in. Maybe you're just piecing together some scripts real quick, like maybe you have to work in PowerShell, in which you can't use anything. You can use, I forgot the newest command. Anyways, everything has its own little special way to fetch data. Curl's just one of those, command line utilities that works on all Unix-based systems, so it's easy to do across the board. Any questions on curl before we move off that? Oh, okay. All right, well, moving right along now, we're going to get back into fetching from APIs. Now, I guess we said ×2, but maybe it means take two. I don't know. I didn't update that. But we're going to now be working again, building another little web application that requests data from somewhere and uses it within our web app. So I'm going to get rid of this. We're going to start with just our blank structure here. All right, this is what we're used to seeing for our front end, right? We have our index.html, which is our starting point for our browser for our web application. We have our style.css, which is going to be our style sheet for all of our CSS design. And then app.js, which is the file that holds all of our dynamic JavaScript coding to work on our HTML. And this will include things like rendering different data based on user input, queries, or not. We do query selectors, we'll do event listeners, that sort of thing. That's what we put in our JavaScript file. So we have been asked to build a web app that lets users select a currency, a base currency, and then get back exchange rates for that currency. And then we're going to show those exchange rates on the page. So pretty simple application, right? We're going to have a way that a user can select a currency, and then we're going to just show the user exchange rates based on whatever they picked. Okay, so I think our general flow will probably be, like allow the user to select a currency. Do we have exchange rates at our disposal right here? No. Does anybody else, do you guys know exchange rates off the top of your head? No. And those don't stay the same, right? They're always changing. So we can't really hard code any exchange rates. We're going to have to look into maybe pulling that data from an API that does maintain those exchange rates in real time. So we'll look into that when we're ready for that part. So we're going to have an option for the user to select the country. We're going to probably get that exchange rate data from somewhere. And then we're going to take that information that we get and display it on the screen for us. Okay, so in order to save time, I hope we are all familiar with our HTML and CSS well enough that I'm just going to copy the snippets in our README to start us off. Okay, we'll take a look at what each of those do when we copy over. Excuse me. Okay. So for our index.html, we are dropping this. brief glance at it, we can see that all this metadata, sure. We got a style sheet link to style.css, good. We're doing a defer and sourcing to this script. Sourcing. Is that, I don't know what, I guess we could call it sourcing. I actually don't know if that's what it stands for. That's just what I say in my head. But does
It's
anybody...
source. You're right.
Okay.
It's source.
I thought it was, but I've never really like sat and focused on it to see if it was. But this, we're doing script defer to this app.jss. What does, or JS, sorry. What does defer mean? What is that going to do with our JavaScript code? Have we touched on this before?
So it'll allow you to it so it stop the script from reading or make your code, your JavaScript code run after it checks everything in the HTML document.
Okay, so close, but backwards. So it is going to stop something for happening until something else happens. But instead of like stopping the JavaScript from running, it's going to actually prevent our DOM with our HTML from loading until after our JavaScript runs first. So you can think of defer as kind of like a window on load feature. Like when somebody goes to your website, your JavaScript is going to run first before the DOM loads. Okay, so that's kind of handy because a lot of times you'll need some stuff set up and in place before the user even starts interacting with your website. It is tricky though, because you'd think it's saying defer this script until afterwards, but no, it's saying defer to this script, I guess. Dom, you defer, okay? And then we can see the title name that will pop up on the top of our browser. And
You
we,
can also skip the defer by placing the script after and the end of the body too, right?
oh, that I don't know. I'd have to look. Alana's shaking her head yes, though. So we will go with yes. Definitely something you can look up. Yes. You can also, if you want to defer until after the DOM runs, you can also in your app.js, you can do like a window on load type thing. And you can run it on this event. But we're not going to do that. That was actually in the original README, and I took that out because it's deferring, so we don't have to do that. Okay, so what does this feature in, what does this look like in the browser? This select an option. Can anybody tell me without us actually opening the browser to see this HTML? And if we don't know, we can guess, maybe looking at, we have a select and it says name, currency, and then option. We have a blank, an option for USD and an option for Euro. So
It'd be like a type of form.
yeah, like a type of form, sure. That maybe like maybe gives me some options in that form. So then how would we see a form with options? What kind of format you think it is?
Maybe a drop-down menu.
Yes, yes, Steve, drop down menu. Exactly. So it is kind of setting up like a form value and then giving options underneath it for that drop down selection. So now that we've looked through and we can see we have a div down here that's empty, right? There's nothing in here, but it's given an ID container. So we're going to be using that later. We're going to be using this ID container and then this ID selector for which is given to our little drop down menu here. So we will show preview and work with this just inside right here. You can use live server if you'd rather use that. Gosh, let's get some CSS in here too. I think it makes the body a little bit different of a color, so it's not so blinding white. I don't think it's too different though. It's like It's honeydew. What's a darker color? Green? That's not a color. What's an actual color? Bisque? Yes. That didn't change it much either. Ugh. Gray. I just want it to be nicer to look at. Beige?
So you're changing the container. You should probably change the body.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that would do it. We'll leave the container as bisque, and then where is body? Body. What? I don't know. This container almost looks this. It's just down there. Okay. So I guess we have to add something. Background color. And we're gonna do, we said beige. Okay, better on our eyes. We like it. Eh. It'll be better once we have data in here, I guess. We'll see. Okay, so we can see we have some styling that has been put in our CSS that we will work with later, but it looks like selecting the element container, we saw it gives it a different background and it puts it in a grid display. Okay. And then we also are selecting the class item. I thought that was an ID, or it says
No, you're doing it right. The period's the class.
item. Where's item? Oh, we don't have one in here yet. We're gonna do one. Okay, so yeah, we have, I was thinking selector, so that's why I was like, selector was an ID. Which it is. We have ID selector and container, but nothing else yet, nothing else. But it looks like we will eventually. We're gonna have a class that we call an item. And then it looks like we're gonna also change that background color, give it some border and text align it. We're also gonna allow it to have a hover color. So when we hover over that item, it will change to a hot pink instead. And then this little media screen thing is just something for accessibility of using, or not, again, maybe accessibility isn't the word, I'd have to see, but it's for allowing the viewport to change. So if you have it bigger, it'll do something differently than smaller. It will make it look better on a phone if you work with the viewport here. I think that's the media screen. It's been a long time since I've handwritten CSS. So at your leisure, look into these if you're curious. Otherwise, we're just going to use this foundation here. I'm going to forget about the CSS besides knowing that we do have an item class to style eventually. But we can see that this pulls up my page. We have currency exchange rates. We said we want to allow the user to select a currency. Looks like we're only starting off with 2, which is cool. And when they select this, we want to see the exchange rates on here for this currency. Okay. So we said we don't necessarily know exchange rates off the top of our head, and even if we did, they're always changing, so we can't just hard code in some values. We're going to need to pull this information from somewhere. If we didn't have our README, which thankfully our README points us to a good source for this data, we would just probably Google it like I did earlier with free APIs. But let's try our hand at like currency exchange API. And we can see there's a whole bunch of different ones. But I kind of want a free one. This one says it's free. I don't know. But this is kind of how you would look for where you might get that data. Ultimately, which API you choose will be based on how you feel about how easy it is to use, if it has something like needing a token to send in to get the data or not. So like this one, we're like, okay, it says it's free, but you need an API key to send in, and that might be a little more difficult than you're willing to work with right now. We will look into using API keys later. I think we touch on that. We might not. That might be for like personal project time exploration. But this does add a layer of difficulty. So we're not going to use that. Oh, you did with NASA on Saturday. Okay. Uh, well, good. I'm sure that was overwhelming. But it's okay to not use a key. Like when you're working on the job, yes, you will likely have to use keys because you will be going through more reputable APIs that require that for data protection. But for now, just learning this, we want something easy. We don't want to work with sending in the key to get our data. It's not too bad, but we're just learning. Okay. So, all right. All right, read me here. We're going to use this free third-party API. Bat comply, I guess. And if you click on this documentation button here, I'm gonna open a new window so I can watch the README as we're, but we can see it brings us to this. So let's take a look at this data and see if maybe there's something we can use that if we give it a, if we give it a currency, it will give us the exchange rates based on that. So we can see that it has these different API services. So number validation, no, that doesn't seem right. EU, VAT rates. If you guys see something that sounds like we can use it for our application to like give it a currency and get an exchange rate, tell me what I should click on. Like help guide me where should we look on what might work for getting our data.
The euro VAT rates one.
So this one gives
The second one.
okay, we can check it out. Well, this I can't click on. So it looks like these ones we can click on. We could probably, nope, we can't scroll down. Hey, look, no API key. Perfect. But we're throttled to 2 requests a second. So if you guys like are sitting there spamming, it's not gonna work. Okay, so these I can't click, but these I can. Is there anything over here that looks like we can use for exchange rates?
Exchange rates.
Yeah, this looks like something we could look into. All right, so this is getting foreign exchange rates, okay, from the European Central Bank, including historical data. Okay. So most API documentation will have the type of request and the URL it is at the top. So this is a GET request to this URL endpoint. Then it will usually show you a response. So how that data is formatted in the response if you try to get it from there. And then they will also have parameters. And these are usually things you can tack on to your request, your URL request, to maybe specify a little bit more what type of data you're looking for. So we can see this parameter, we have a base, which is the base currency for conversion. Okay, that sounds right? We're going for like, we have in our website, we're going to have a base use currency for conversion. So we should probably use this parameter. Symbols is comma separated list of currencies to return. I don't know if I want to specify which ones. I think we'll just get all. We can see it's not required. So I think if we just hit this endpoint without specifying anything, it'll probably just give us all the data, all of it. We could try to filter it out by like maybe just giving us the data based on a specific type of currency. And then we could give it a date as well for historical rates, but we're not doing that. Our application is like here and now. So again, we're doing all sorts of work before we actually start coding. We're going to, I gotta sign into Postman over here. What is my Postman? Do I have it saved? No, but there's my bills stuff. Okay. What is my password? Okay, we're gonna try this over here. So y'all don't have to watch me struggle. Maybe this one. Sign in. Yay. Okay, that was successful. All right, so we'll get this. What? I just signed in. It's telling me session expired. Maybe because I have it on my work computer. Shoot. Well, my Postman's being dumb. I think because I have it open and up on my work computer. So we will just not do that right now. I'm trying to get it to stop asking. Oh, hey, well, I could use it without an account, so let's do that. So let's take this URL and put it in Postman. So you want to start a new request, which will pop up here. You can push the plus to get new requests going on. This is going to be a GET request. We're going to target this URL. And then right now, let's just try it without any of the parameters. So we're probably going to get a lot of information back if I don't reduce this in any way. So let's send. Okay. So when I submit just to get data from this endpoint, it looks like it gives me a base of euro. So that's cool, but we want to specify which base we want the information for. And it looks like it gives me a ton of different exchange rates based on the euro. So that's good. That's what we want. We want to see all exchange rates based on a certain base currency. So now parameters. We can throw these on our URL with a question mark. And we can see when we type that question mark in there, down here in the form, you can cheat and you can add it in the form and it'll do it for you, but it will make it like a key value pair. And it's going, the key is the parameter name and then the values, whatever you want to pass in. So if we use the form, we'll see it typing up here, just like when I typed it up there, it started coming down in the form. So we want to be able to specify the base. That's a parameter we can include in our GET request. And I am going to try with USD to make sure that I can change it, because we saw we can get euro by just visiting that site or visiting this endpoint, requesting from this endpoint. But I want to make sure we can get the USD currency exchange rates as well. So let's send a new request. I've got that checked. It's on my URL as a parameter. So when I send that, we can see now the response does give me USD as the base currency. And it gives me a field or a key called rates. And then it looks like it's an object that has, or a dictionary that has the name of the currency and then the exchange rate right afterwards. Okay, so now we can start making a plan because this looks like what we want. We want this right here, that information on our web application screen. So we saw we can request it from this URL, and we can even specify if we want USD or euro, and it will give us the correct information. So let's start thinking about how we want to plan our JavaScript to get that information for us. So let's go in here. What is the first thing we probably need to do to even start looking at getting exchange rate information for us? What did we say we wanted the user to be able to do? So go ahead, Alana, before I start.
So the first thing we need to do is to have the user pick one of the drop-down things, and we need to make it work.
Yes, exactly. We need the user to be able to select one of these and use this information in our request to get the data, right? Because if they pick USD, then essentially I want to make this API call to get this information. But if they switch to Euro, then I want to make this one instead, right? So it's dependent on what the user selects. So we're going to need to first, how do we determine what the user has selected in this dropdown? What did we learn with our JavaScript in the couple classes ago or so?
Query selector?
Yes, we can do query selector, right? We can target this element within our DOM. We can focus on this and select this element. And then what do we want to do if we need it to change? Like if we're looking at this element, but it's going to be changing. So we can't just select it and that's it. We have
We need
to,
a button.
we need a button. Well, what do we do in the JavaScript with our buttons? What is that called? It's not a query selector at that point. If we have a button,
Add event listener.
event listener, yes. We want to add an event listener to this dropdown as well. So we want to select this dropdown to put it into focus. And then we want to add an event listener to essentially see what the user lands on in the dropdown. Okay, so let's say we're going to grab the dropdown and we'll grab the container as well while we're at it, right? Because we're going to put the data in the container. So might as well just grab each of these elements in our DOM ahead of, like at the beginning, good place to put it. So then we can work with both of them throughout it. After we grab those, we're going to need to listen for a change in the dropdown, i.e. event listener, like we said. Okay. After that event listener registers a change, we should then, what should we do with this value? Kind of a wide open-ended question there. And there's a few different right answers, actually. So we've got, focus on this dropdown and container, listen for a change in this dropdown. Once it changes and they land on a value, what do we want to do?
We can have it then show the rates.
So we can have it show the rates then. We would probably save this value somewhere so that we can use that to get our rates, right? Yeah, so let's see, how can I put this? We could save the selected currency. Because even if we set up an event listener to listen for the change, it still has to do something, right? We could set up an event listener and it can be like, oh, it changed. Cool story, and do nothing. So we need to do something with that event listener and we want to save that currency that they land on. And then, like Alana said, we want to get the rates and display them there so we can use that selected currency to fetch exchange rates from this API like we did here. Okay, after we get the exchange rates back, so our response from the API is going to look like this. It's going to be an object that has a date, a base, and rates. So are we just going to take this whole thing and throw it up on the screen? I know some of y'all might be tempted to just take the data that's returned from the API call and just throw it in that container, but does the user need to see this date? Nah, they don't need to see that. They know, like, they expect this app to show them right now exchange rates. They don't need to see that. Do we need to show them the base again? We've already got a feature here where they're seeing the base, so probably don't need to provide this information to them either, right? But rates, this is what we want. We want rates. Do we want to show it as rates and then another dictionary here with key value pairs? Nah, probably not very professional to just throw up rates, and then we can't even throw up a dictionary on our screen in the HTML, right? I mean, I guess this is going to be JavaScript, so we could throw the JavaScript maybe, you know, it would just, that's not like good practice though. We don't want to just throw up raw data looking all ugly, right? We should probably use this data and structure it in a way that's pleasing to the eye when we visit this web app. So maybe instead of having just a big list of all this stuff, we can throw up little item cards that have the, you know, the name of the currency and then the exchange rate with it in there. And when we talk about items, because we actually have styling that targets items, so maybe we can make each exchange rate in this dictionary, each one of these is an item that gets put into our web app. So that way we're not just grabbing the whole chunk of data and throwing it on the screen. We're going through and taking each item and doing something meaningful to it and presenting it in a way that is much better for the user. So we will have to take that like rates dictionary. Well, yeah, dictionary object into something iterable so that we can make like, I'll do 2 lines so that you can make item cards for each item in that dictionary or object. Okay. So this seems like, and then after, of course, after all that, and this is probably a given, we're going to display those cards in our container. Okay, so that's pretty much what we need our JavaScript to do, right? And it has really 3 big responsibilities. At least after we add our little drop down event listener thing here, but we have, you know, fetch the data. Then we're going to convert the data into something iterable, and we're going to display it as cards in our container. Okay, so let's break it down into easy to work on chunks. So in the README, if you're following along there too, we're going to work on like 1, 2, and 3 all in the same section, basically. So let's put these together and we'll worry about the rest later. Let's get it out of there. I don't care about that right now. So first we need to grab the drop down and container. So we already, Alana said earlier, we would do query selector for that, right? So let's give these some variable names. We'll have the selector, which is our drop down, is going to be document.query selector. And then we're going to target. So we can target several different things with query selector, right? Let's look at our HTML and see what the best way to target our dropdown is. And we can see for our select, we have a name and then we have an ID. So what's the best way to select this HTML element? Alana, no. Somebody else. Yes, Izzy, correct. Yep, ID, yes. So ID is always, if you have an ID available, or if you don't, write one in there. That is the most effective way to identify and select the exact thing you're looking for. So we are going to select selector. Okay, so # for ID selector. All right, now let's make one for the container as well. Container, because we're going to eventually put data in there. So let's just go ahead and select it so we can work with it later. And this one, I think, also had an ID, right? Yes, it's called container. So we will add container in there. I'm going to move this back over so we get more room here. Okay, so that took care of our grab the dropdown and container, right? That one is done and good to go. Now let's work on the listener. We need to listen for a change in the dropdown. So how do we add an event listener to something? What do we have to do first to add an event listener to something? The selector, okay, perfect step. Yep, selector. So we need to identify what we're adding an event listener to, right? So what are, in our thing here, we're adding an event listener to the dropdown. And we've identified that selector is that dropdown based on how we have done our query selector here. So selector is what we're adding an event listener to, and we're going to add event listener. We are going to, and then for event listener, it wants to know what type of event it's listening for. And then you will do like a fat arrow, you'll do the event and then a fat arrow, and then what happens when that event runs. Okay, so we are listening for a change. We're listening for this to change to something else, right? So that's the type of event we're going to add to it. We're going to add a change, and then we'll take that event argument that's passed in, which is the change. And then we're going to do our fat arrow function here. Okay, so now all this part inside the fat arrow is what's going to happen when this changes. So we want to listen for a change, which is what we're doing here. But then we want to save the selected currency. So how can we do that in our event listener? Does anybody remember the 3 magic words that you string together to figure out the like value that's shown in this like drop down option or any like input on a form? Anything to see this item's value. Event target value. I see it in chat, yes. So event target value, just memorize it. It's going to be your best friend. Anytime you have an event that you are targeting, if they're like we're doing a change on this particular selector, so then when the event occurs and the change happens, this change value is what is the event target value. That was probably a really weird explanation for that. But if you want to grab what is in your dropdown, in your input, in whatever type of interactive thing you have in your HTML, you would do event change or event target value. We're going to assign it to a variable for good practice. We're going to call this selected currency. And we're going to say it's going to equal this event target value, our favorite phrase. Okay, so that pretty much takes, saving this into, we've got it saved into a variable that we can work with later. Okay. What happens though if I come here? What is it going to save in my variable? So I expect if I select USD, it would set selected currency to USD. Same with euro. What happens if I come back to that? What's it going to set selected currency? Is selected currency gonna have a value? Do we see anything on the screen?
Would it be not yet because we need to save it first?
So if we switch to USD, it will save it as USD because that's the value that's shown in this right now. Same with euro. If we switch here, the event will fire and it will save euro into selected currency. So the event's firing right here when I've switched. So it's going to take this and save it to selected currency. So what's it actually saving to selected currency for this drop down selection? Well, if we don't know, let's go ahead and console log selected currency. This is your best friend when you're developing your JavaScript in your web app because you can log things you're working with here like this, but then we'll also log data from API when we're making calls to API. So let's open up our, crap, that's why I don't like this. Our developer tools here, where it always opens up on another screen for me. So, gosh, this is gonna go behind it every time. Okay, we'll see if it works. Let's do this and then pull it up. Where'd it go? There. Okay, so we can see I picked USD. My event listener is working, right? That's cool. So it noticed the change and then it saved that target value into my selected currency. So that worked perfectly. Now, when I go back to empty, let's see what it does. It did something, it saved, but it saved an empty value, basically. It's empty. There's nothing there. So that might be weird with our API call, right? When we're doing our API call to get the data, it expects an actual base currency. If we just try to call it and like send in this value, which is empty, that's gonna mess things up. So we should probably handle that. Do we want to do anything when this is empty? Seeing some head shakes, no's. No, like, I mean, we don't want it to get data or anything, right? It's just kind of there. It's like clearing out the options for us. I mean, we don't have to have it there, but it's good to have there, just to start from a clean slate. So let's not do anything with it though. People can choose this option, but let's not do anything. So let's say if that selected currency is going to be like an empty string, like it is here, then let's set, so we can just exit out of this, right? And just wait for the next event to occur. That's how we can return and do nothing. So that might work, right? If we choose USD and then go back and choose empty, it will just not do anything and wait for the next change in the dropdown. But what happens if we are on, so I'm going to eventually use this selected currency, we could see, to make an API call and get our exchange rates, and eventually throw it on the screen here. So I'll probably have to do that within this listener that's setting that selected currency, right? So further down here, I'm probably gonna have to like, we can just pop this up here. I'm gonna have to use that up here to get that currency and, convert, or we might not do that in there. We might do that outside, but then display those in the container. So if I select USD, it's going to use that, get the exchange rates, and display it on the screen. If I switch back to the empty one and it just returns, then what's going to happen with all the rest of the stuff that I threw on the screen when I looked for, USD exchange rates? Is it gonna, like, if I go back here and I just say, oh, well, return, is it gonna do anything? Like, what if the USD data is still down here? It's gonna clean it up for me? Or is that data gonna stay?
Right now it's going to stay
Yep,
because
oh,
because
go ahead.
you're not telling the container that you're adding a blank to it, right? You're clearing the screen, so you have to clear the screen.
Yeah, exactly. We would see that as we developed further. If we didn't know that now, that's fine. If you couldn't like really piece together how you were putting together this app, and didn't know the way it was going to flow until, I mean, some of y'all are just going to keep going, and I do that too, like work through and change where things are displayed and how they are displayed. That's cool. Eventually, you would see that if you pulled up USD and populated your container with it, um, that's going to happen in our event listener, right? Because we want things to change when we change our dropdown. So if it populates the data in the container and then I switch to the blank, right now we've got it so it's just going to exit and do nothing. So all that previous data will still be on the screen. Won't overwrite it because we've told it just get out of there. To combat that, you can say, take that container that we're going to throw all our data in, that container's inner HTML, and set it to empty. Oh, I'm going to do that too, just for consistency's sake. Okay, so this way, if for some reason, or if we get to a point where we're populating the screen and there's no cleanup feature before switching back to this, once we switch to a blank base currency, it will clear that inner container for us before just waiting, returning, and waiting for the next event to happen. Okay. Do we need to take a break before continuing on to fetching from the API, or are we good to keep going? Thumbs up, thumbs down. I see no thumbs down, so I'm going to take that as all, let's keep going. Okay, so we've done these first few parts. Now let's go ahead and try to get our exchange rates from the API. So we saw that I moved this in here because we created a variable to save what selection we made. But it's within this event listener. So any API call I make is also going to have to be within this event listener to have access to that selected currency. Okay. So I want to fetch the exchange rates, but I don't necessarily want to write all of that logic in this event listener. Okay, so the best thing to do, and this will come as you develop more and mature a little bit in your development, instead of just continuing on and doing my, my constant response equals whatever, our asynchronous fetch from the API, instead of writing all of that logic in my event listener, because it's going to get big, this would become a very big function. I'm going to create a new function, and its only purpose is to get data from the API. So that way we can reuse it. because maybe somewhere else in the application we want to query and get those exchange rates again. I don't know, but we're going to make a separate function that queries for the exchange rates, and then we'll just call that function within this event listener. Okay, so this is that kind of separation of responsibilities. This event listener is solely going to get the currency of the event, make the API call, and display it on the screen. But it doesn't need to have the logic for all of that stuff cram-packed in here. We can just make other functions that carry that logic that we'll call in. So let's make first things first. How does anybody remember the setup for a fetch? Not quite. It's okay if we don't. We're going to go to our curriculum, and we're going to go to our web. Week 7, day 4. Is that where we first learned fetch? Okay, so this is what, your typical syntax will look like. You're going to define it as an asynchronous function and then the name. You're going to have the URL that you're going to fetch data from. You're going to say constants response equals await fetch from that URL. Constant, like these two lines are pretty much going to say the same in everything you make. You might see the variable name change, but you're always going to have a response be await the fetch, and then the data is going to await the response.json to turn it into JSON format. Okay. Do we do an arrow function in here? Nope. So today I'm doing the same structure, but instead of writing it as a regular function, I'm going to do an arrow function. So you'll see it in both ways then. That'll be kind of nice. So we're going to write our asynchronous fetch data function, but I'm going to name it better. But this is what I mean, like bookmark things periodically in class to like refer back to code snippets, because you can use this, you can copy and paste it and just switch out the things that you need to, like point to the different URL and maybe name your function differently and stuff like that. So I'm going to write it as a fat arrow. I'm going to say constant fetch rates. That's going to be the name of my function, okay? And it's going to be an asynchronous function. What does asynchronous mean? Did we go through that last class? Asynchronous? Do we remember?
It's not going to wait. It's gonna give a promise and come back to it when it's done.
Yep. So what does it do for like the rest of the code? Is the rest of the code stopped or?
No, it's going to keep on going.
Yep, exactly. So asynchronous means that other aspects of our JavaScript will continue on unless if we're waiting for that data for some reason in something. So like in order to make the card object, we will probably wait the response from this function, but other functions will not wait on this if they aren't reliant on this data. So things will keep working and moving while this one sends out the request and then is waiting for that response to be fulfilled. That promise, the promise is so funny. We'll see that tonight too, the promise. Okay, so we're going to take in this function, we're going to take in currency as an argument or a parameter because our API lets us tack on just a base currency at the end of our URL. So how can we pass in like variable names at the end of a string? What can we use to accomplish this? Is it when I use like an F string? Does anybody remember the technical name for that?
Interpolation.
Yep. We can use interpolation to make that currency URL, which our README doesn't do, but I'm gonna do it here because I thought of it while I was teaching. So first we've seen that we need that, let's see, what do we call it? I closed that window, didn't I? No, I didn't. Okay, we call it like whether you, so we'll call this rate URL. This is what it is when we're trying to get euro, but we need to be able to pass in a specific type of currency, base currency to place in there. So let's make this an F string instead. Is it F? No, what is it? Is it $sign in JavaScript? Let's look it up. I can't remember. Doesn't have F strings, but what does it have? It is $sign. And then, so it's backtick and then a $sign before the variable that we're trying to interpolate in there. Okay, backtick, backtick again. And then this is going to be dependent on what this value is, right? So that's going to be $sign. And we're passing it in as a parameter for this fetch rates function. Okay, so there we've got our URL that we're going to be querying, and it's going to take in that currency that we're passing in to structure that URL. Then we're going to do our response is going to be await a fetch from the rate URL. Okay, and then our data is going to be await the response.json. Okay, so again, these two lines pretty much stay the same in every fetch, and it's going to pretty much stay the same when you're working in React as well. You need to have a response, you await your response is await from a fetch, and then your data is going to be await, changing that response into JSON. Why do we await? Has to do with the asynchronous feature. As we said that by making this asynchronous, all the JavaScript will continue running, right? So it would run this line, and then it would come here and run this, but I have an await. So what does that do? Is it going to continue on even before the data is given back to me? I see head shaking, no. So if we await, that is telling it to pause this portion of our JavaScript until we get back, the fulfillment of that promise, until we get that data back from the API. So yes, the JavaScript will keep going and chugging through its code, but if you put await, it's going to stop and wait for that data before it can continue on with that line. So we have to do an await for the fetch to wait, get back that data, and then we also have to await the response since it's also awaiting the fetch. Okay, and then we will return our data. Okay, so let's plug this API call into our event listener now. Okay, because we can use now our selected currency to fetch the exchange rates. I do also want to see what this data looks like. So we'll do that in a second. First, let's move it into our um, let's see, sorry, I lost track of what I was saying, into our event listener here to see what currency we have fetched. So instead of, sorry, not moving it into, we're going to call it, right? We're going to call it in this event listener. So we can call fetch rates. Let's assign the output to a variable. Okay, we're going to say that the rates are going to equal fetch rates, and then we're going to, since it takes in a base currency, we're going to feed it the selected currency that we're grabbing from our target, our event target value. Okay, so now that we're calling this API and getting data back, now let's console log our rates to see what that looks like. Okay, let's do this, and then after we console log, we'll take a break. Okay. Where is the little blurry thingy here? Is there a way to add this to the? No. I don't use VS Code enough like this. Whatever. Okay, so we'll just, sorry, I hate that feature too of the new Windows. There's gotta be a way to disable that. Let's just put it like this. Okay, so my console should show fetching the data when we switch. Oh man. So it didn't show us the data. But I switched it. I had the event happen. It obviously, I mean, I don't know if it selected the right currency. We can make sure it did. Let's try it again. Okay, we can see it's selecting the right currency. So then it's running this fetch rates, and then it's console logging the rates. So what's happening? Okay, so I see return data dot rates. Let's try that, because we did see before when we did our little test that if we just grab the data, it's going to give us this whole thing. So let's try targeting just data dot rates and seeing what happens. That's a good idea, because that also gives us a little bit more specific what we were intending to return. So, oh no, it's still doing a promise. So why is it throwing a promise? I've got this asynchronous function that I'm getting data for, and I'm waiting that response here, and then I'm returning it here. So why is it not giving me the data up in this function? This one is a normal function that is just going to run right through. So it's going to run, it ran that, right? Gave us that selected currency, and it came down here and ran this line. And then it immediately ran this line right afterwards. So what's happening? Does it look like it's waiting for this to get the data back? Well, do I see data? Do we see anything up here? Nope, I see a promise, so I don't see data. So then it doesn't seem like this console log is waiting for all of this to happen. Yes, Steve.
Do you need to tell it that it's an async event, meaning that it needs to keep on running and not stop?
Yep. So exactly. So this function respects waiting for that data, but this function does not. Because this is not awaiting anything. It's not awaiting the response from this function call. So it's just blowing through all of its JavaScript code consider, like, it thinks it's a regular function. It doesn't, even though it's an asynchronous in definition, it's not going to wait. Like, this whole thing's just going to run through. So we need to await this function. We need to await that data in order to console log it and see it on our screen. And to work with it afterwards, right? We need the data back before we can do anything else with it. But now we say, when I say await and wait that info or wait for that data to come back, we can see it's only valid in asynchronous functions. Easy fix. We just need to change this function, this event function, to be an asynchronous event. Okay, so we just make this asynchronous as well. So we're allowing this event listener to be asynchronous and to await information. So then we have to, this variable will wait to be assigned before it will console log that variable. Okay. So that will get you a lot in the beginning when you're working with your API responses. You'll see a lot of promises in your console if you're trying to console log data. Just be aware of when you need to await. If it's like within a function here, you'll need to await for that data, that promise to fulfill and return, and then we can use it. Had we come down here and done this, I think that's right. We could see within this asynchronous function where we are awaiting our fetch and our response JSON. At the end, when I console log the data, we can see the data is being returned in this because we are waiting for that promise to fulfill. Okay, and that's a good way within your fetch functions. It's a good way to see your data coming across too without having to open up Postman if you're just too lazy to open that up. We can see it shows us, it's going to give us back a base, a date, and rates. And when we expand rates, we could see its key value pairs in a dictionary. Okay, so we are going to pause the recording and take a break here. And then when we come back, we will work on using the data that we've just got from our API and putting it on the screen. Okay, so jumping back in, we just fixed our little issue we had here with using await in order to see our data on the screen here. We're going to comment that back out. Actually, we'll just take it out completely. Let's put it back in. And let's just make sure that it's working for both selections. So we see USD returned all of this, and then Euro returned this, and it looks, yes, it has Euro, and then it has, let's make sure they're different. That was for USD, this is for Euro. Has the one, and then this is Euro. Okay, cool. So it's different data sets, it looks like. Looks like the API is doing its job in giving us that information. So now we need to figure out how we're going to use this data that we're visualizing over here and put it on the screen for our users. We already talked about making little item cards for each of these exchange rates. Are we going to only need one piece of this information in this dictionary? Are we only going to need like the values, or are we also going to need the keys as well? Yep, I see Sue nodding her head yes. We need both, right? We need both the key and the value looking at this data, because if we just throw this number up, they're going to have no idea what it is. So as we iterate through this object here, or however we're going to iterate through, we're going to have to be able to grab both the key and the value from this dictionary. So Does anybody remember how I can grab keys and values from a dictionary? Off the top of your head in JavaScript. That's like a hard no, like I was earlier. That's okay. Because we could Google it too. So I want to grab, ooh, I almost knocked my soda all over. Get key and, oops, that was from dictionary or from Python. Key and value from dictionary JavaScript. All right, let's see what we get here in our little AI overview before we look elsewhere. So we can use either something like object.entries, object.keys, and object.values. That sounds wonderful. So if you want both keys and values together, use object.entries, and it will return an array of key value pairs. Okay, let's look at an example. That sounds like what we want to use. So for this, we have A1, B2, C3. This is how it's structured. For constant, so we're defining a variable, which is this array, and we're labeling both these values in the array for a key and a value of this object.entries of whatever thing we're iterating through, this dictionary we're going to iterate through. And then it's just console logging those keys and pairs. We'll keep this in mind. I'm going to just grab this and save it just in my JavaScript, comment it out, just to kind of review later when we're actually working at, grabbing the information from our data, which is now empty because I changed the code, but to grab the information from our data list. So we'll just keep that there, keep it in the back of the mind, because before we can grab data and throw it in like an item card, we should probably create the cards first, right? This is kind of the theme with all of our JavaScript that we've been doing recently, and it says in the README too, like we're going to iterate over each element and then follow our usual steps. We're going to reference a parent element, we're going to create a new element, and then we're going to modify that new element, modify the element, and then append it to the parent. So that's our typical routine when we want to put data into our HTML with the DOM, with manipulating the DOM through JavaScript, is we need to create the element first, and then we put data into it, and then we throw that element onto a parent element. Okay, so let's create our rate card first. So we're going to create a function to do that, because up here, I am going to get the rates, and instead of console logging the rates, I'm probably going to create a rate card for each item in the dictionary. Okay? So in order to create a rate card for each item in the dictionary, I'll probably iterate through it like this for each key value in the objects of our dictionaries. Then we will maybe call a function to create a rate card passing in these values. Okay, easiest thing, separation of responsibility. This is my event listener. This event listener does not need to create rate cards with explicit coding. It can call a function to create that rate card within itself, but it should not have all the logic for creating a rate card because it's an event listener. That's not what it does. It listens to events and it does multiple things based on that event. So let's delete that because we threw that up there as a comment under our event listener. Okay, so now we're going to make a new function that will be called create rate card. Okay, we like fat arrow functions here. So when you get into the into React, you'll probably use a lot more fat arrow than regular functions. Just saying. Okay, so we're gonna pass in parameters of maybe the code, like the, what is it, a base or the currency code? That's what I looked like when I looked it up. I guess they're called codes. The country code, is that it? Country code. That's what I'm thinking. So we're gonna take in like the country code, which is the first half of our data return there. We're gonna take in both this country code and or currency code and the value or the rate of the currency exchange. So we're going to take in those two values to create a little item card. Okay, so we'll have the code and we'll take in a rate as well. And then we'll fat arrow over. Oop, if I can do not this, okay. And then we call our function or perform steps within our function that will create this card. So first things first, how do I just create a random, like what's a good random element to keep a whole bunch of stuff in? It'll be like a big chunk block chunk. What's a good HTML element for that?
A div?
Yes, I like a div because it's not, I mean, it's not a paragraph that we're creating and we're not creating some other types of like block elements, but a div is a block element that's kind of undefined and can have a lot of different meanings to it. So let's make a div kind of just to hold all the rest of the things we're putting in our card. So you can think of the div is going to be just our, I'm trying to do it on the screen here, our empty box. We're going to just make a div. That's our card. And then within that, we'll have like each of the, you know, elements within our little div card. So we'll call this card is going to equal document create element right there. Okay. And then it takes in the type of element you're creating, which is going to be a div, right? So creates the HTML element specified by the name. All right, so we've created an empty div square that we can throw other stuff in. So we want to put in there both the code and the rate. We will do that by changing the inner text in the div. It's probably the easiest thing there. Instead of creating other HTML elements within it and nesting, let's just create an inner text or change the inner text of this div. That will display our information. As you get more experience and mess around more, then you can work on creating maybe like a little heading on title, paragraph, you know, other stuff you want to do within the div. But for now, for time's sake as well, we're just going to say card.inner text, not HTML, inner text. And we're going to just set this equal to be our code and rate. Okay, we're going to keep it really easy. We're going to do our interpolation to pull that information down in here. So we have backticks, and it's going to be the code. And then we'll do maybe like colon, and then the rate. Just keep it real easy, just to put the data out there. You could dress it up, dress it down, however you like when you mess around with it yourself. And then also, remember, when we're creating these cards, we also have style we were intending to give these cards. That will allow us to have style for background colors and hovering over it. So this we said was right, and it comes up on the screen as a class, right? So what else should I do when I create this div element? What else should I do with this div element in order for me to apply? Yes, exactly, Alana. In order for me to apply the styling that I have specified, I want this div element to have a class name of item. So we're going to select this div, but what have we called this div that we just created? In our text here, what did
Hard.
Card.
Yes, exactly. We've called it card. So let's actually select the card and we could do class name and set that equal to, I said item. Okay, so these are all acting on the element we've created here. We can set the inner text, we can set class name. Let's see what else we can do. Card dot, oh gosh, there's so many different things. Append, we've seen that for when we add it to our parent item. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different, I don't know if those are attributes or, yes, that must be attribute, right? A property. Okay, it's a property. That's the technical term for it. You can have a whole bunch of different properties for this div object. Okay. So we've created the card. And we've got the inner text we are changing to be the code and the rate. What do we have to do after we create the card? Is it going to show up on my screen anywhere right now, as is?
We have to append
Exactly. What do we append to?
the child.
Let's see. So if we look back at our main screen here, what would we be appending to?
Would you put it in div ID container? Or like just the div though?
Yeah, that probably is where I want to put it in this container, because if we, let's see, look at our element and we look at our body, this div container right here is a grid underneath all the rest of this stuff here. But it doesn't have anything in it right now. It's just empty. And this would be the parent element, because we're about to, when we append, it's actually going to create the child. This will be a child element created to that parent that we're specifying here. So let's add it to our container, which is right there, our div ID container. So let's say container, append, and then we're going to add this card element that we've created and modified. Okay, so now this whole function is going to handle all of the DOM creation steps. We've already targeted the container up here. That's why we were able to do container append. Sorry. If we forgot, we've already targeted what parent we're appending to up here for use later. So that's always the first step. Target where you're going to, append your new creation to. We have created a new element. We have modified the new element with text and a class, and then we have appended it to that parent. Okay, so now get this out of the way, because now we're going to be able to start seeing it on the screen. So where does this go? I have a function now to create a rate card. Okay, so where am I going to call this function? Looking at the rest of our code here, should I call it just outside of all of our functions on its own? Or does it, to create this card, do I need specific information? In fetch rates. Yes, I would think we would put it in, well, fetch rates. So fetch rates is just querying our API and returning our API data. Within fetch rates, does this have any visibility to the code and rate right now? No, and I mean, we probably could manipulate this further and throw it in here, and do this card creation, like we could probably take the logic we saw here and move it into here and work with it all within our fetch rates. However, fetch rates is a function that is just going to get our API data. Kind of want to leave it at that, just in case, you know, somewhere else in the app we want to reuse it. If we throw this specific create card function call in here, then it really limits us to being able to use this to do that very specific thing, to get data and make cards. Whereas this by itself, we can reuse this piece over and over and over again. So I think what I want to do is, in order to display these rates or create a card with a rate, what am I gonna, can I just take the data as it is? Like, as a reminder, here's how our data is being returned. It's going to be returned in a dictionary. Am I able to just call create rate card up here on the dictionary based on how I've written my function? Let's look at the parameters here that I'm passing in. Am I able to pass in just a dictionary and use this create card on a whole dictionary? No, I'm seeing Steph shake her head. No, it's taking two parameters, right? Our dictionary is one object, because we aren't doing anything to it yet. When we get it back from our API, we are just getting the rates as one dictionary object. So in order to create a card for each of these codes and rates, I'm going to have to iterate through the dictionary object, right? I'm going to have to iterate through, and then once I'm on a specific line in my dictionary, if you're thinking about iterating through each line, then I can create a card passing in that line's, you know, code and rate. So in order to create a rate card for each item in the dictionary, I have to iterate through. Do I want to do that in my event listener? Do I want to iterate through my dictionary and work with it to then call the create rate card function on it? Should I be writing extra logic in my event listener? That will probably be what I'm going to be using, but right now I'm still trying to figure out where I want to place it. So I probably, oh, go ahead.
Wouldn't you want to separate the duties and all that and create its own function to display the rates and then call it within the add event lister?
Yes, I like that. Yep. So again, I was, thinking, oh, I'll just come up here and, do a for loop and iterate through. No. The event listener should not have that logic. It should not be doing this iterating through your data response logic for you. It should be just telling it what happens during this event. It's going to fire off these functions during this event. Okay, so separation of logic and duties. We're going to create yet another method, and you can call these like helper methods. These are methods that, or functions, you can call in other functions to help you end at your, final data location. So we're going to make one now that's going to basically display the rates from our dictionary object. Okay, so we're going to have this one now. This function will take in a dictionary object, and then it will call this create rate card on each of the, iterations of this dictionary object. So let's name this one display rates. Okay, And this one's going to take in our rates dictionary that we are getting back from our API. Okay, so first things first, we've decided that we need to iterate through our dictionary object. And we're like, how can we loop through it and still capture the values of both the keys and the values? That's where we Googled and got this, get both of the key and values while looping through by doing this. So let's reuse this code snippet for our use up here in our display rates. So let's first just work on iterating through and being able to capture the key and values of each item as we're looping through this dictionary. So much like our code says down there for constant, and then it has square brackets, and it looks like we give parameter names, or not parameter, we give variable names for these key and value pairs in the dictionary. You can say key and value, but that's not very meaningful. We know these as codes and rates, so we might as well just call it code and rate. So for each code and rate of object dot entries of our rates dictionary that we are going to pass in. Okay, so that looks like the first bit there. Good catch, Steph. We'll go back to that in a second. This one is iterating through, and on each line, it's just going to console log in. So let's do that too, just so we can make sure that we are capturing the information like we think we are. Of course, our variable names are different, so we have to update these to reflect what our variable names are. And then let's change our f string to reflect that. So the code and our rate. I call it f string, whatever. That's what, what it is in Python. Okay, so we've reused that snippet that we found online. Hopefully this works for us. Now Steph made a good point. So this container dot inner HTML, she said, gotta empty it also. Like, so at the beginning, before we even start putting everything in, let's make sure it's empty, because what if we're switching from USD to Euro? We know that when we were switching from USD to empty, we've got this, empty out the HTML up there. But if we were switching from USD to Euro, if we didn't empty out that HTML, it would just keep putting it in the same container, one right after another. Right? It would just add it all in together. So we need to clear it out before we start putting new things in. So let's clear it out for whatever may have been in there beforehand. We're going to iterate through each one. Right now, we're just going to console log it. Okay. I just want to make sure that we can see, I guess I will pull up my inspect again. Make sure that it's doing what we think it's going to do, going through our data. Okay. So I've got display rates here, but I want to call it and then see what that might look like when we're looping through the data. So where can I put my console log? Right now, I'm not calling it anywhere. I do know that up here, we do have rates being returned. So, and we were able to console log rates. So what if we let's call this display rates on this rates dictionary response and see if that works. So let's make a constant What did I call this earlier? I come up with all the, let's call it. I didn't have a good name. I'm getting tired, so I can't even think of variable names. I don't want to call it rates again. No, we're doing a card for each one, but we haven't done that yet. But that's fine. I'm not going to worry about the name of this yet. We'll name it after we start working on actually creating a card. I just want to see display rates when I pass in no, I can't console log.
Question. Well, not question, but shouldn't line 36 be container.append child?
So do I have a child anywhere in my code right now?
No, it's by itself.
No, so with our append, when we hover over it, it says append. I guess it says like nodes, so inserts a node after the last, but we have to specify what node we're talking about. And in our case, our node is the card. In most of your examples up till now, you've probably called this child. So then when you go in and append, it would be append child when you do a create element. So that might be where we're thinking about append child. It is a child, but we are giving different variable names, so we stop getting so fixated on like the like, oh, it's called child. Oh, we did this. Just so we could see where we can make those changes. So we can make that there. I think here, display rates, and we're going to pass in rates. I think this is what I want to do. I'm going to just call this function, which I already have a console login, on this rates API response. So let's shrink this again. Oh, we don't need Postman. Just for a second here. Okay. And we are going to choose USD. Oh, okay. So we could see we still have a console login here somewhere that if I was turning this in, I would probably comment this out. Where are we at? Selected currency, right? Where is it? Console log selected currency. Get this out of there. We don't need that. Okay, but then we see we're console logging now the display rates. It does look like it's going through our dictionary and breaking it up correctly, right? It's assigning the first item in each line as a code and then the second one as a rate. So we could target those as code and rate now when we're trying to pass it in to create a card. Okay, so console log looks good. I am grabbing the information as I thought I would. So now let's continue on and flesh it out more by using the, so when we display these rates, we're going to iterate through, and instead of console logging, what do we want to do? We set up here, we want to create a rate card for each item in the dictionary, right? So ultimately, I do want to call this display rates up there to iterate through and create. So down here, I'm iterating through each one. And what did I want to do?
Create the card.
Create a card. Yep. Do we have some sort of helpful function to help us create a card?
Create rate card.
Yes, we have create rate card, and create rate card takes in a code and a rate, right? Which we have so conveniently tested out. We can assign to variable names down here like this. So I can say for each item in this dictionary, we are going to create a rate card, and we're going to pass in, we called it code and rate. So pretty easy. We're going to pass in the code and rate. Okay, so let's take a look and see how this goes now. We're just going to see, because theoretically, this should get this information and then call this display rates and just create a card for each one. So cross our fingers. Wow, it is. It's created a card for each one. That is exactly what we wanted it to do. Let me close out the developer tools because that's annoying. So we can see when we went to USD, it grabbed our API data. So it called, well, first it recognized that our selected currency was what we landed on in our event. Then it calls this fetch rates, which gets that dictionary from our API. And then we display rates, which in turn display rates is actually two functions. First, it calls this, takes that dictionary and iterates through it. And as it's iterating through, it creates a rate card and adds them to the container. And we can see our styling works. So obviously that class name item was applied to each of these div items. When we switch to Euro, we can see it updates. It cleared out the element first, like we said we wanted it to, and gave us new items, new card items here. And then when we go back to empty, it just clears it out and stops because that's what we told it to do. Just clear it out and return out of the event when that happens. Okay, so that was it for the main meat of the lecture. We are going to fly through this last part. Like, I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm just going to show you what happens when we get additional requirements. So we thought we were done, but now this time they want us to display the symbol along with the name and the exchange rate. So here is a mock API to run locally. If you open it up, oops, I didn't mean to open a window, but we can see it's just a repo. So, and look, in the README, it even tells you how to use this. You can just fork this, clone it down. In your terminal, you would change directory, like the README says, to where this is located. You would npm install, npm start, and then you have a local API that's feeding up data. And we'll learn how to make this, obviously, later in this class. But I've already cloned this down, so I'm just going to show you. I would get open my terminal. This is located, I cloned it here, right? It is the currency symbol server. So it says to change directory into the server directory. And within here, we'll see a whole bunch of stuff that you don't really need to know about because you just need to run what the README told you, which was npm install. It'll do some things, and then npm start. And now we can see this is running an API server right here on over port 9888. But we could query this, or we can make some fetches, some GET requests, just like we do with a regular API over the internet. However, to get to this one, it would be going to localhost because that's the URL it's going to be located on. Localhost port 9888. And then this one says the endpoint is code equals. Okay. You could see that by just doing a GET request, I think. Maybe it doesn't say. Okay, here's the example to use in Postman. So it looks like you do the currency code on this URL. So we're just going to copy this URL. I did not set up this in that way, but instead of putting the URL directly in the fetch request, you can add it as like its own constant up here. its own variable. So I've made this, that way it's easier to change out if you need to update something and you don't have to go and find every instance of it being used within the application. So I'm going to use this as a base URL for this symbol. Okay. And then we're going to add a new fetch request. Instead of fetching rates, we're going to fetch the symbol. It's going to follow the same structure. Except, I'm just going to copy from the README. Instead of, where's fetch symbol? We can see instead of having the URL within the fetch function itself, oh, darn it, I messed this up when I updated. This should not have this in here. That was for testing. So we should not have a default in there. I will fix the README at some point, but it should not have a default. But basically, this is going to take in a code as a parameter. It's going to fetch from the URL we have identified at the top of the page here. And we can see this parameter at the end of the URL where we did, down here, we did question mark base equals and then the currency. We're doing the first part up here in this URL, but then we're adding in the code down here. We're just appending together in the string. Okay, so here's the response is to await a fetch from that URL. The data is going to await the response.json, and then we're going to return that symbol. And then we're going to throw that in. We are going to throw that in creating a card. So here, let's throw it in creating a card. Now, before we make a card, we're going to make the symbol for each card. And that's going to await the fetch symbol function. So we're going to pass in the currency code that we're grabbing from each item in this dictionary. And then we're going to try to fetch the symbol that is associated with that code. And now I'm saying we need to await it. And in order to await something, we need to make it asynchronous around it, right? So I need to change this to an asynchronous function. This is the same thing we did above when we changed this event listener to an asynchronous event, because we need to await some information. In order to await, it needs to be asynchronous. So we're awaiting here because we're trying to get data from our fetch symbol. So we made this asynchronous.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So I know that if you're trying to put a wait, it has to be asynchronous, but if it's asynchronous, do there have to be awaits?
I want to say yes. I want to say like those two are married.
Okay.
I haven't tried running it without, let's Google. Okay. So I guess it says no. So you don't have to have an await with an asynchronous function. You can use it without if you are just returning a standard value, but you use, oh, okay. So you would still need to like wait for data to be returned, but you would do it in a different way. Instead of awaiting it, you would use a dot then, which kind of is another type of waiting. You will say like, give me this data and then do all the rest of this stuff to it. At least that's what this said. I would have to look into it more. I just know that if you have a wait, it has to be asynchronous. Yes, the default is definitely going to be synchronous for sure. Code reads top to bottom. and waits for nobody. Unless we have an await and asynchronous. But that is a good question. You would get errors if you put an await in and did not change it to be an asynchronous function. And you would probably get something weird happening vice versa. If you put a synchronous in and then we're doing some fetching and didn't await, then you'd probably have some promise issues. And you'd either have to await or dot then, which I don't think we teach you dot then anymore. Okay, so I think this is good. I've created a rate card and I'm fetching the symbol and now, okay, let's add it into, because I'm getting the symbol, but I haven't put it on anything in this card. So let's put it here. Just throw it on there. Okay. And then let's try this because now the card should have the symbol on there. Should be good. Okay. And it does. So that works out really well. However, I did not expect that to work. Let me inspect and see if it threw anything when we did that. Let me also not, how do I not select this anymore? That's annoying, the little flex thing. I don't know how to make this not selected here. There, okay. Just unselect the grid. Okay, so let's do Euro and see if anything, not that console. This one, no errors. Okay, I assumed we would have issues, and I think if we were getting a lot of data, we would as well, because this display rates is calling this create rate card, and it's creating these cards immediately. And it's not much like we had the issue with the promise before, where it was just console logging promise. I would assume that while this is fetching the symbol, if it was a larger or a third-party API across a horrible network, something like that, I would assume that this card would get created before it waited for this symbol to fetch. Because we had to do that here, right? We had to make this listener an asynchronous to await the rates being fetched. So I kind of need to like await creating a card until this resolves within it, if that makes sense. If you are calling a function that relies, oh my gosh, we're going to go all the way to the end of class today. But if you are calling a function that relies on any sort of promise to be fulfilled, which this one is also waiting on it, you need to await it. Because even though this went fast and worked and put the symbol on here, there may be times when it would create the card and throw it in your DOM without that symbol being returned from the API. Okay, so good practice is to await here as well. We're gonna await that create card. And because we are awaiting that, we now need to make this one an asynchronous function as well. So now when we switch, you can see it paused a little bit longer, but that was because it was waiting for the symbols to actually be returned from the API. Okay, that was the last little bit I was just throwing in real fast to show you adding some more function calls, and then all these having to wait for that data to finish before rendering in our DOM. Any questions before I end the recording? We can see that little flex grid thing that it did. Made it so when you're changing the screen size, it's great, huh? Okay, and all this code is in the README. It just might be slightly different between some of these being fat arrow and or where the URL is located, but all this is in the README.